There's Sophie. Sophie's joined up. Sophie is a media professional, and it shows. We can all turn our heads and look at you.
Oh no. I've been out of the world of technology too long, and Zoom was invented when I was out wandering around with the camels. Is that better?
It is, but I liked it the other way because it really gives us the feeling that you're on the other side of the planet, down under, upside down.
Right. And I know I promised some my beautiful camels in the background, but it just started raining, so I've now got a background of some lovely hay.
It's okay as long as you're dry. Listen, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say thanks to everybody who's here right now, and I expect that we might get a handful more as we go along. Sophie, here in the U.S., it is the eve before Thanksgiving holiday, so people could likely be on the road. Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, for tomorrow.
Thank you, from the future.
That's right.
Well, I thought that doing this on Hump Day would be, appropriate. I did take into account that it probably would, be the night before Thanksgiving, and we may have low numbers. But I promise you, whoever's here is going to be tickled to hear you chatting. Before we go too far, I've got just a handful of things that I want to go through here. Of course, welcome to those of us who have joined. We are recording, so for folks who can't make it tonight, daughter Delaney is producing tonight's Zoom meeting and recording it, and we're going to have that available. Folks, you probably know, if you've been following the Coast to Coast Camel Trek with Sophie Matterson, that the basic idea is that Sophie has taken 5 camels from the west to the east, crossing the entire continent of Australia. And I think, if I may be so bold, Sophie, to say, 5 years ago, you didn't have a lot of camel experience, right?
I remember when I came to stay with you, Doug, when was that? 5 years ago? I think I could barely even saddle a camel.
Well, we've got some images that kind of take our attendees here in Zoom through those early camel years. You worked at a dairy over on the East Coast. Delaney, can you bring those images up?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen, so let me know if you see something weird. Hopefully, can y'all see that all right?
We've got an image right there.
Perfect. Okay, then I'm going to keep this up. And Sophie, you could just tell me when you want me to scroll, and I can be commander of the ship.
Commander of that. Well, that was my time. That was my time in India with Doug, and I remember, we went out on that beautiful camel trek out there, and I was asking Doug, I'm so sorry, I can't remember the name of the gentleman that took us out, but he was he was showing me exactly how to put those Indian saddles on, and it's quite different. They're a little bit, well, actually our saddles in Australia, they're based off the Indian camel saddle, but they seem to mount them a little bit differently than we do. So I was very new to camels. Then I'd done a little bit of work at a dairy, and then I started traveling overseas, and I sort of thought, I'm just gonna head around the US and then to India too, and just learn everything I can about camels, and that's how I ended up with Doug, learning from Doug, and then joining him on a trip to India and learning a bit more from the nomads over there, the Riker as well. And then I came back to Australia, and I sort of carried on my education with camels there, and started really getting from the dairy, started getting more onto the trekking side of things. So have a flip, Delaney. We'll see what other stuff. Oh yeah, this is when this was at Doug's clinic in Texas, and you were teaching me, Doug, how to tell the age of a camel by their teeth, and I found that super helpful, actually, because my camels here, I've got one female camel who's fully grown, but I've got 4 boys who are, actually, when I first got them from the wild, 2 of them had their baby teeth. And so then they lost those baby teeth and started growing their adult teeth. And so from their teeth, I've been able to tell exactly how old they are. So I now have 2 6-year-old boys and 2 7-year-old boys.
Wow. Sophie, that's really interesting. You've taken some young camels on this adventure.
I have, yeah, I have. And it's, that's had its challenges for sure. Absolutely. It's really like taking teenage boys across the country. And about, the whole of last year, when I first started the trek, I had one of the boys as lead camel. And then I actually switched it to my female camel this year, only really about 4 or 5 months ago. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, because she's just so much more level-headed being a mature female. So she really keeps the boys in check and gives them a really strong leader to follow.
That's fantastic. Delaney, I think we've got one more image from Sophie's time kind of before trekking started. Yeah, Sophie, what do you see yourself doing there?
Well, this was just before I reached Doug's place in Texas. I ended up going to a camel dairy in Michigan and learning a little bit more about the dairy side of things. So I was in that shot. I'm milking their camels there. I have to say, Marlin up in Michigan had the most beautiful dairy camels in great condition, and it's still some of the most fantastic camel milk I've ever drunk. It's just, yeah, his operation was very smooth and very lovely.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, as we had looked at these images of you at a dairy in Michigan in the U.S., at a camel clinic in Texas, you had said that you thought that you wanted to travel outside of Australia to pick up some camel knowledge. And I think all of us sitting here probably find that a little ironic, because you've got incredible camel knowledge there in Australia. At that point, what took you outside of Australia? Why not just tap all of your domestic resources?
Well, it was partly a bit of the situation. So I had a trip planned to the US as it was to go traveling. So it was kind of partly an extension of that anyway. But I loved it, I guess, in the sense that, yeah, it gave me an idea that there was, a world outside of the Australian camel industry world. And I guess it still sort of allowed me to, one of the major things I took was just thinking that there's always 100 different ways to do something. And one of my biggest things back then was really just looking at all of these different ways that everyone did stuff outside of Australia, in the US, in India, and then back home in Australia, even from different camel operators, and just handpicking exactly what worked for me and what worked best for my camels. And so it's that definitely, I think that really helped to sort of broaden my knowledge and think outside, just, because sometimes, people that have been working with camels for a long time, I've learned an incredible amount, but they can be quite set and this is the way it's always been done. And so I've liked really, thinking laterally about it and looking at every different way that it can be done.
Well, you sure did that. I think what you would have seen in the US with camels, in India. You even dropped in on a camel ride concession in Baja, California, Mexico.
I did. I did too. Yeah, it was great. I still love it, and I'm still keen even after this trip to get back overseas, once COVID settles, and see different ways that they're doing it in other countries. I haven't explored Northern Africa. I haven't really done much of the Middle East in terms of camels. So there's always more to be learned. And I think that's one of the, well, for me, that's been one of the lovely things about camels, is it's given me an excuse to travel to, obscure places that I maybe wouldn't have gone to. And also I always love, there's just, such ancient camel cultures around the world. So it's something that people in many other countries have been doing for hundreds, if not, hundreds of years.
That's fantastic. So Delaney, let's go ahead and move on with some images. I guess then, Sophie, to take you into the trekking era of what you were doing, you got some pretty good help in Australia. You spent time with Camel Treks Australia, Karen and Paul Ellis. You
Yep.
ended up at Uluru with Chris Hill and Bert Held.
Yep.
I would say that you got some pretty incredible tutoring once you got back to Australia.
I did. I just feel like I got incredibly lucky with the mentors I had, and really like you know, both of them were so diverse too. So I headed to Karen and Paul first, and that's really, I guess, what cemented my love of the actual trekking side of things, and being out and doing you know, camping out with the camels and that kind of stuff. So they really made that foundation. It was probably when I was out there that I started to sort of formulate the plan of wanting to do this big trip. And then I moved to Uluru Camel Tours, and Chris Hill's operation was, yeah, very different to Karen and Paul's. He did short rides, sunset rides, and sunrise rides around the rock, but he has a huge number of camels. It's a big operation, and it's an incredibly well-oiled machine. So I really learned so many, you know, Chris was incredibly helpful, with being able to, he was in the right spot for me to be able to get my camels too. So my camels, Chris helped me muster them. And also, yeah, he helped me muster them. He helped me build the saddles. And so really without his help, I wouldn't have got my mission off the ground.
I know you honor those who have helped you. I know those folks personally, and I know that they were keenly interested and invested in the success of your endeavor. Now, when you talk about mustering these wild camels, and Chris helped you, how far out from Uluru Camel Tours were these camels? How far did you have to go to find them?
Oh, so it's one of the neighbouring stations, and when I say stations, I mean large properties out in that area. But having said that, properties in Australia are like 1 million acres, so it's one of the neighboring ones, but yet it probably took us about a 2-hour trip out to get to that station. So they came from a station called Mulga Park, which basically sits on the Northern Territory and South Australian border, basically almost, if you look at it on a map, right in the centre of Australia. And their camels come out from the central and western deserts. It's an area known as the APY lands, which is a big holding of Aboriginal land. So those camels move in and out of the station country because station country for livestock has troughs and water points. And so the camels were coming in to have a drink of water and then heading back out to the desert. So when I went out with Chris, Chris Hill brings, for his camel tours, he brings in all of his camels for the tours from the wild there. So I went in with Chris and I did a day's mustering with him, and it was from there that my mob of camels came out of that. And there is, in Australia, there's a bit of a camel meat industry. So the camels that Chris doesn't pick for his tours, sometimes they might be too old. They might just not have the right conformation or so on. They'll actually go down for camel meat. So in some ways, my 5 that got picked out of that mob, we actually brought in about 90 camels over 2 days from the wild. They went down to become camel burgers, unfortunately. So my mob got pretty lucky.
That's interesting. I was going to ask how large the group was. You said 90 brought in. How did you select these 5 out of the 90, particularly given that you ended up choosing some youngsters?
Yeah, well, that's where Chris Hill actually came in. So I didn't actually select my own because I looked at all 90 and went, man, I'll take the lot. They all look beautiful. They all look like beautiful camels to me. So Chris, who's selected many different camels from the wild, he really gave me a hand with that, and he picked out what ones he thought were good camels. And I guess that's mainly for Chris, from what I understand from working with him. It's based off age. You know, if you get a camel that is that age that mine came in at, a sort of 5-year-old or something like that, you have a big working life ahead of them. But they're also getting close to the point where they're almost sort of reaching their fully grown size. You know, they might have a couple more years of growing to do, but you've got that huge working life ahead of them. And then it's also, you know, Delilah, my female, she had an absolute guess, because like I said, I can't really tell with her teeth. She might be 10, 15, but she was just a really well-built camel, and she actually came in from the wild pregnant. But she was a camel that you could just tell had very good condition on, and she would be able to keep that condition, and she's proved that the whole way through. She's always been one of my better doers, as they say. So yeah, it doesn't take much for Delilah to keep her weight on, which is good.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, so you've got this experience behind you with a couple of different you know, large outfits there in Australia. When was it that you came up with the idea that I'm going to cross Australia, 3,000 miles from the Indian Ocean all the way to the other side of the country?
Yeah, well, like I said, I guess it was probably, I mean, you know, it's something that it just comes in little bits and pieces, and you start to sort of slowly formulate the idea in your head, and then before you know it, that idea is kind of lodged in, and then you kind of can't even remember when that moment was that you came up with it, I guess. So I guess you know, even back in the dairy days when I first started, you know, you start to hear of other people that have done camel treks. Obviously, Robin Davidson is a very, very famous one in Australia, and she trekked from Alice Springs over to the West Coast. And she was really the first woman to do it too. So she was very pioneering and wrote a very famous book called Tracks, and it's been made into a movie. So I started to sort of think, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool to do a trek of my own? And then when I went out with Karen and Paul, I thought, I love this. I love being in the bush. I love being remote. I love exploring this landscape and camping out with camels. So then I was definitely, you know, thinking about, and part of it for me too was also the idea. I loved the training side. I loved the training side of camels. So the challenge for me was to really get my own wild camels and to train them myself and to take them. I think, to be honest, if I had loaned fully trained camels from an operation in Australia, I wouldn't have done it. It wouldn't have had the same interest for me. The challenge for me was really for me to have trained my own camels, and to see the growth of those animals and to see their progress. And that's the thing I'm most proud of, is I'm most proud of them and their achievement in doing this.
Originally, I think your idea was to have a nonstop crossing, one continuous movement from west to east. That's not how things ended up shaking out, though. Can you talk about that?
No. Adventures rarely go according to plan, I guess. So yeah, originally I sort of thought I could do it in 9 months potentially. And I thought that, yeah, so the biggest thing in Australia is that obviously the entire continent basically is very hot, and especially in that interior region. So you really have to cross those deserts in the wintertime. It's too hot to cross in the summertime. So I always knew that 9 months, I thought, yeah, we're going to have to, you know, push it, and we're going to have to be doing a certain number of kilometers to be able to make it across. And it was probably about a month or two in. I remember just thinking, oh man, we are not making anywhere near the number of Ks that we should be making. And the camels were losing a heap of weight. That was really unexpected. I think it was sort of a combination of the fact that they were new to it. They'd been on a 6-day truck trip across to start the journey. They, you know, the stress of beginning something new, they just really hadn't put on enough condition. And then in Western Australia, it was so dry, and a lot of the feed had been eaten away by stock, that they just really started to lose condition. And I remember calling Chris Hill on the sat phone, I think probably in tears, being like, we're just not going to make it. I don't know what to do. And I remember Chris Hill just saying, he was like, you've got to do what's best for the animals, and you can't be in a rush with that, and it takes you as long as it takes you. And so that's when I really, you know, pulled back, and I just started to go at the pace that was best for them and for me, and which meant I knew at that point I was not going to make it across the hotter regions in that 9-month time frame. So I knew I'd have to pull up at the halfway point. So we reached Coober Pedy in October, which Coober Pedy is right in the centre of Australia. It's actually one of the hottest towns in Australia. We reached there in October, which is coming into our summer season. So I pulled up and I gave the camels 6 months off. They went down to join Karen's camels in the Flinders Ranges, just south of there. And Karen did a fantastic job as well of looking after them with her camels, and they put on a huge amount of weight. They were with as well a mob of Karen's. Karen had about 30 camels down there too. So I think in some ways having youngsters, it really benefited them too, to be out in a herd of more mature camels, and camels that knew the region as well. And I just couldn't, when I picked them up at the beginning of this year, I just couldn't believe how much weight they had put on.
Wow, you took 6 months off, and I think what I'm hearing is it was really two-pronged. You were going to have to avoid that hot summer through the center.
Yeah.
And camels were also a little bit behind the curve on condition. So listening to Chris, you took that advice, you put your camels' needs and condition first. You come back, and what did you discover? What did you see in those 5 camels?
Well, like, they had all had a huge growth spurt. I guess there's that time, like I said, like 2 of my boys or 2 are 6-year-olds, 2 are 7-year-olds. Camels don't really finish growing until around that 8-year-old mark, as most of you probably know. And so they just had one of those. Jude had a final growth spurt, and he was looking bigger and stronger. And Charlie, one of my youngest boys, I'd been most worried about him, and he had, I really worried taking them into the desert, because I knew I had basically 3 months of crossing the desert last year, where if anything went wrong medically with the camels, there was no getting out of it. Like, there was I couldn't get a truck into that region to come and pick the camels up. So that was the scariest moment, was knowing that, like, once I set out on those 3 months, for one, there was no yards to be able to put the camels in, to be able to break if they went lame or anything like that. That was nothing to secure them. No yards and no way to get them out if anything happened to them. So, and knowing that I was going in kind of thinking, oh my goodness, they're not that fat anyway. But they pulled through. They're amazingly resilient camels. But when we came into Coober Pedy, Charlie, had not much of a hump at all. And when I came back and saw him 6 months later, it was like he'd magically grown this hump. He was like the little camel that got his first hump. And so that was really special to see all of them, just looking fantastic.
I love hearing it. I love the affection that I hear in your voice for these 5 camels. We have a saying here in the livestock industry that your cow, for example, like a milking cow, is your partner. And it really sounds like you entered into this with that idea in mind, but it sounds like it probably even grew and metastasized somewhat along the trail. The personalities came out. And you came to know them a little better day by day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still will always come back to the fact that they are my number one priority. Nothing else in the trip matters except them and their happiness and their health. If anything is going to compromise that, like, the general public or media or whatever, it's they have to come first. They always have to come first. Anyone's opinions of the trip, or whether people, I guess, and Chris reiterated this to me when I spoke to him on the sat phone. He said, you can't be held up with, oh, everyone thought that you said that you were going to do it in 9 months, and now and now you're not. Like, at the end of the day, you're putting your animals first, and no one can begrudge you for that, and that's the best thing. And it's worked out. It's been the best decision I ever made. We all went into this year much happier and healthier, and I think sometimes with camels and camel training, I found too that sometimes you can give them such a big experience such as this, or, a huge amount of, you might do a big block of training. And sometimes it's good to just stop and do nothing. And it's like it just sort of it sinks into their heads and sinks into their brains, and they lose nothing of it. One thing that blew me away was saddling them up for the first time again after they'd had 6 months off. They'd been 6 months basically roaming around a huge property, acting like wild camels again with a mob of other camels. And I thought, oh, it's going to be a whole retraining process. You know, they're not going to remember anything. And it was like they did not even skip a beat. They were straight back into it. You know, nothing had changed. They remembered every bit of their education.
That is really great to hear. As you started back after that 6-month period, I'm sure it gave you a ton of confidence, and it was a big burden off your shoulders. So we've got these handful of images. What I thought we would do, the one that's up right now and has been up for the last 10 or 12 minutes, may not be the most descriptive image, but I thought what we do is throw a handful of images at you and see what the reaction was from various stages on your trip. So why don't we just start with the groceries there? What do we see?
Absolutely. Well, right now today, those boxes have just been hosed out because there was a bit of an ant infestation in them. But those boxes they're my food boxes, and they've seen me through the whole trip. So in those boxes I can carry, there's 2 of them. And I can carry about a month's worth of food, actually at a push probably about 2 months. I reckon I sort of weighed them early on when fully packed. They probably weigh about 35 kilo each. So that's, 70 kilo or so, plus they sit on the camel saddles they sit on. I've got some racks that those boxes sit in. So it's maybe probably all up with saddle and everything included 90 to 100 kilo. And at the moment, they've been sort of rotated around a lot, but at the moment my end camel Mac, he carries those. And inside of them, I sort of steered away from tins. I wasn't a big fan of carrying tins because I felt that they'd be too heavy for the camels, and then you have the issue of rubbish too at the end of it. So a lot of my stuff I put into little Hessian bags, and a lot of that is rice and noodles and lentils, and probably the only canned thing I take is cans of tuna, which I probably never ever want to eat another one of those in my life after this trip, or muesli for breakfast. I'm done with that. But yeah, so and the fresh food I take is sweet potatoes, onions, apples and oranges, and I find that's pretty much the only thing that keeps. On top of the boxes there are those little pre-packaged naan breads, which are great. I just take them straight out of the packet and I put those directly on the coals, and I just heat them up that way, and they're awesome to have with stews or pastas or anything like that.
What was a particular treat? Did you allow yourself some indulgence along the way?
Oh, big time. Always take Nutella. Nutella is my number one go-to because it's basically I'm a chocolate addict, and it's basically the only form of chocolate that is not going to melt. So I always have a stash in Nutella. It's almost to the point you've got to sort of steer. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff. So I actually don't pull up for lunch or anything like that. I just keep trekking the whole day, and I just find that that's the easiest on me, and also the camels. I don't like the camels to stand around while I eat lunch, basically, with their gear on their back. I'd much prefer to keep on going, get to camp early, take all the gear off their back. They can relax and I can relax too. So mainly I'm just snacking on the road, and it's tough to find snacks that aren't, super sugary as well. So I joke sometimes I'm going to walk across the country and end up with diabetes at the end of it. But no, I've tried as hard as I can. I'm big time into making proper dinners. I do have things like 2-minute noodles and stuff that I will go back to if it's a terrible windy or rainy day and you just need to eat something quickly. But otherwise you just can't sustain yourself on that kind of thing, not for such a long adventure. So I really try and get proper good wholesome food into me at nighttime.
Good deal. All right, we're going to consider this the speed round. Tell us, what do you see?
Alrighty, so that's coming out of the desert, actually, out of the Great Victoria Desert. We had a bunch of rain right at the end of the desert crossing, and it was just like, I said that no one could have got to me. I couldn't have got a truck to get the camels out of there. Well, at this point here, like, no one could have even driven to me in a regular vehicle, in a regular four-wheel drive. There was just water lying around everywhere, and but it was fantastic because after that it all soaked into the ground, and wildflowers started to appear. So it was amazing to see the desert transform in that way.
All right, these images are in no particular order. Tell us what's going on here.
That was at the end of last year's 6 months out on the road. So I'd got to the stations, the camels were having a break, and I was taking all of the pads off my saddles there and oiling them all, cleaning them and oiling them all up, and something I hope Chris Hill will be proud of, as he helped me make those saddles, and he was always big into teaching me that they cost a huge amount in equipment to make those saddles. So it's you've got to look after them well, and they will then last you years.
Fantastic. Next slide.
Oh, and this is on Beltana Station also, when I was taking a break with the camels, just to get them kind of back into shape. I ended up taking them out with one of Karen Ellis and Paul Ellis's expeditions. So there was a bunch of tourists also came out with us, and I thought I spend my whole time, well, my whole trip across Australia, I've walked the entire way, but I've always wanted to train my camels to ride. So I felt like this was a good opportunity to do a bit of ride training. So that's me with riding my lead camel, Jude, at the time. This one is just when I hit the road again this year, actually. And it was amazing. The landscape was very different, actually, to last year. So in Australia, we have deserts, and they have a type of rock on them that's known as gibber stones. And the gibber stones are these beautiful red rocks, and they compact into almost like a tile-like surface because they sit on top of clay. So a lot of our deserts are quite stony and open deserts, and especially around Coober Pedy, and it was just absolutely dead flat with not a tree in sight. I was kind of stressing because I was like, what am I going to tie my camels up to at night? But I always seem to manage to find one tree that all five could crowd around. And yeah, so that was outside of Coober Pedy, and I thought, well, if there's ever a point to do a beautiful silhouette shot with nothing in the background, this is the time. This is just recently. So this is heading into the hills of the Great Dividing Range. So all along basically the eastern seaboard of Australia. So from way up north towards, north of even Cairns, we have this mountain range that basically runs parallel all the way down the east coast of Australia, right down to Victoria. And it's a huge, big, long mountain range. Not particularly steep or spectacular, but it's sort of where after the flat of the outback, it's where the hills begin. So this was heading up towards those hills there, and that's been a new thing in itself because my camels had never really done mountains, and turns out they're not great animals for mountains. They're not particularly great on the downhill, so that's a slow process taking them up and down the hills. This was a bleak day. So I took this shot right after my camels had taken off on me. So I was maybe about a month into the trip, and my lead camel, Jude, I guess this was the thing that was really hard at the beginning, was that the camels were so new to it, and they were young and fresh, and they were spooking at everything. And Jude saw, of all things, just a cow, but it was in the bushes, and it was in a sort of a shady area. And of course, all of a sudden they thought there was a monster in the bush. So Jude ripped the lead rein out of my hand, and I watched in absolute terror as all of them basically took off into the distance. And at that point I realized I didn't have my sat phone on me, I didn't have the EPIRB on me, I didn't have my navigational equipment on me, I didn't even have water on me because I'd left everything on the camels' backs. And I was very lucky. I ran after them for maybe 3-4 kilometers or something like that. It felt like an eternity. and I lost sight of them. I kept having to stop and listen to the sound of all the equipment flapping on their backs, and it was just like a downward spiral, you know. Jude had the swag falling off him, my sleeping equipment, and that was freaking him out. And then Mac had the jerry cans flapping on him, and that was freaking him out. And they're all dragging one another, and it was an absolute mess. And luckily, they sort of headed around a bush and tangled their ropes in a bush, and that was the only way I caught up with them and got them back again. So it was a terribly scary experience, and it was a bit of a great learning curve in some ways. I was lucky that none of us got hurt. The camels were all okay. I was okay. I got them back, and I big time learned after that to take things pretty seriously. I actually started using a nose line after that, for safety reasons, just in case that was to ever happen again. And also I always carried water on me, sat phone on me, EPIRB on me, and all those safety things, because if that had happened in the middle of the desert, not only would I be stuffed, but also, you know, it wouldn't be a good situation for the camels too, because they would be taking off with equipment on their back and I might never find them again.
That must have been an incredible point in the trip.
It was, and at that moment too, I stopped, probably just when I took that photo, I stopped, and I ended up I sat for about an hour, and made a cup of tea, because I just thought, because I had got myself into such a panic that I knew that I was not going to be capable of dealing with the camels, you know, in a quiet and calm way if I just carried on and you know, went back to try and find all the equipment that had fallen off, because I had to retrace the camel tracks about, you know, over an hour to get to back where I had dropped my phone, which I was using to navigate, and a few other things had come off the saddle. So yeah, I really, it taught me to sort of stop, take stock, and breathe, and and you just really have to proceed at stuff with, you know, a calm and level head, which is not always easy.
You keep echoing that the camels were your priority. I know that this image is fairly recent, and it shows again you keeping your camels the priority. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this is awful. This is something I've only just experienced since coming to the wetter regions of Australia. They've got, I contacted a camel vet over here, Margie Bale. I'm not sure how well known she is in the US, but I think she is a little bit. Yeah, Margie confirmed to me that it is a type of ringworm, and she suggested, what I've been doing is spraying betadine on there, and she also suggested a shampoo for that you can use on dogs too. But problem is with that is you need to shampoo all of their saddle cloths, their tack, and everything like that. So that was the first one I found, and then after that I saw it appear on all of the other camels, because unfortunately they're itching up against the same trees and rubbing up against one another, and it's something that you just never see on camels in desert regions, because they, you know, it's a fungal thing that can only thrive, I guess, in moist conditions. And it's been a bit unfortunate that it's a particularly wet season this year. So not only am I taking them to a wet part of Australia, but it's a particularly wet season. And so, yeah, I've really had to keep an eye on these things. And they seem to be sort of not getting worse at the moment. And I'm just hoping that they're going to clear up when we head back to these dry areas. This was recently too. This was actually up in the ranges, like I said, the Great Dividing Range, and it was a lovely. This is a bit sentimental, this image, in some ways, because it was one of my last days of walking on my own. As I was saying before, I've had to have, now that it's got busier, I have to have my lovely partner Jimmy has come along and help, and he's walking with me to keep me and the camels safe on the roads, doing traffic management. My friend Kieran as well has come now, and she's in a vehicle behind me just because the roads are so busy. But yeah, this was my last day. I walked through a national park, and it was a fire trail, so there was no one on it. And it was my last day of just me and the camels, and some beautiful mountains and forestry. I mean, I thought it was beautiful. I don't think the camels were appreciating the hills as much as me. Delilah was looking particularly tired and over it that day, but yeah, so that's in Cataract National Park. These are the good old days. This was back, it was sometime this year, this photo. I think it was I did one stretch that came along what is known in Australia as the dog fence. So it's a fence that runs between Queensland and New South Wales, and it's designed to keep the dingoes out of the more fertile pastures of the eastern part of Australia. Anyway, it was sort of around that area, and this is one of those rare moments where I had the camels in hobbles. And so they're out grazing in the evening, but it's one of those rare moments that they actually stayed near camp, and I was able to sit down with a book or my journal and actually just sit for a second. So this photo is deceptive. It didn't happen all the time. This this is beautiful Strzelecki Creek. So this is in the Strzelecki Desert in Australia. And I decided I haven't done that many cross-country sections of this walk. I've been on outback tracks, a little bit of cross-country, but it's mainly sort of very small, unused tracks. But this point here, I actually decided to divert away from the track that I was following and head up a creek line. And it was so beautiful. It was, no one, few people ever travel down these dry creek beds. They're just way off the beaten track. And it was lovely to be able to take the camels down through there. We saw a few wild camels in the area too. Luckily, they didn't seem too interested in us, so that was good. So we were able to keep, head along our way. And it was one of my favorite parts of this year. Oh, this was training my little camel Charlie. So this is back at Uluru Camel Tours, and that's little Charlie there, who I said who lost a lot of condition last year. He's one of my youngest camels. And Charlie, in terms of character-wise, he's kind of, I always say, he's coming on a joyride across Australia. He carries about 40 kilos. It's what an army person would carry. It's absolutely nothing. So I could really do the whole trip without him. But he's absolutely invaluable when it comes to stopping at people's places with families and kids, because he is just the most loving, pattable camel. Charlie would just be happy just being a camel in a petting zoo, really. But yeah, he's so affectionate. Everyone that's sort of a little bit nervous with camels just falls in love with Charlie. So he'll always stay part of my team. This was one of the first days. I think this is probably one of the first days I took out Jude as a lead camel, which was so nerve-wracking, when you've gone from having these wild camels, and then after I brought them in from the wild, I would connect them to one of Chris's camels that was quite experienced, and so they would follow along behind Chris's camel. So you always have control of them because you've got control of your lead camel. But then this was one of the first days that I actually switched it up and made my own camel the lead camel, and so it was sort of nerve-wracking. You're always wondering, are they going to be okay, and are they going to take off on you or anything? But I was so proud of Jude that day, and he took to it.
You've got a really big smile on your face in that image. I think maybe you were really proud of your team. You're seeing something new out of them at that point.
Yeah, big time. And like I said, like for me, it wouldn't have been the trip that I wanted to do if I had just taken fully trained camels. To me, the adventure really started almost a year before I actually set off from the coast of Western Australia. It started the moment I got those camels from the wild and started training them, because I was just constantly seeing, from going from little scared, big scared animals huddled in the corner of some yards to, like you said, seeing their personalities emerge, seeing them, learn to have a halter on, learn to have a saddle on, and to become, working animals, and also my best mates. This was on the beautiful coast of Shark Bay. The water in Western Australia is this absolute, as you can see, crystal clear blue. And it was one of the first times I took the camels down to the ocean. I don't think it was the day I left. So the station that I started from was right on the coast. So it was maybe about a 10K trek down to the beach. So I took them down to the beach a couple of times before I actually sort of did the final leaving point from the beach. So they got to see the ocean a couple of times. I remember the first time they went into the ocean, or Jude went right over and tasted the water in his mouth and flung it around and stamped the water and so on. But it was crazy for animals that have never ever seen the ocean. I was just amazed at how they just walked straight up to it, and it just didn't even seem like a big deal for them. This was right at the beginning of the desert stretch last year. I'd just gotten into setting off across the Great Victoria, and actually that camel sort of in the middle there, that's Charlie, and you can see there his hump was really not much at all. And I'm also carrying the rifle, so I'd started at that point in time. I was well into wild camel country. I was seeing wild camel tracks everywhere. And I had to take a rifle on my trip because unfortunately in the wintertime, the camels go into rutting season. And there was wild bull camels out there that could come in and basically threaten my camels because they're, mine are all shackled up with their hobbles on, or there's, ropes. They might get caught in the ropes, and the males are, just at that time of year, just basically they only want to fight and mate, and that can cause issues with mine. So I'd started every time the camels went grazing, I had to follow them everywhere they went with the rifle slung over my shoulder, just in case a wild bull camel would come in. And unfortunately, I did have to shoot a few out there, which is never something you want to do. And it must seem awful for you guys in America because I know how treasured camels are over there and how expensive they are to buy. And here we are in Australia, we just shoot them sometimes. But I really started to learn to be able to tell who was going to cause a problem and who wasn't. So I never had an issue with a bull camel that was in with a herd of females. Generally, you could spook the females and the bull would go plodding along behind. It was only when it was a lone bull camel, and you would see it in them straight away. They would come over frothing at the mouth, doula out. They'd look like they were jacked up on steroids, big muscly things, and you could tell they were coming over with intent. And unfortunately, because I was on my own, I just didn't want to risk it, and they had to go.
When you saw those wild herds, not necessarily these lone males, but herds, what kind of numbers?
All different, actually. Probably the biggest I saw was maybe about 20 in there. And then I saw as small as just, a couple of females and one bull. So nothing really big. And I've talked to Chris Hill recently about this, and he said he thinks that the numbers in the herds have seemingly getting smaller. Whether that's come from the amount of culls we've done in Australia, or whether that just varies maybe on season to season as well. And it definitely, you could very much tell out in the desert when the camels were, I went through a lot of dry areas, and I would see on the track that I was walking on, like the wild camels had literally using the track like a highway, and they weren't even stopping to eat because there was no water and no good feed. So they were just using this highway to traverse across kilometers and kilometers. And then I would hit a patch of them where there was this great, bit of feed, camel feed, and then I might see a couple in a day even. So they're so migratory, camels, very, very migratory.
Seeing these wild herds, whether they were 10, 20 in number, it sounds like, as you were talking about, if you could spook the females, then that bull would go after them. What did you learn about camel behavior while you were out there in the bush and seeing these herds?
Yeah, it was so interesting. It was really interesting because I sort of, initially I was very, I guess, sort of, not trigger happy is not the right word, but I was very sort of ready with the gun at every moment, worried that anyone would, come up to my herd. And then I really start to learn, like I said, I really start to learn, who was going to cause trouble. So big time I learned, that when there was a bull in a herd of females, obviously the females generally make the decisions as to where they want to go and graze. So if you could, shoo away the females, the bull would never leave his girls, so he would just carry on with them. Sometimes the younger bulls would hang out in a group of a bachelor group, as they're sometimes known, and they might be bulls that are sort of 5, 6, 7 years of age. They haven't found a group of females themselves. I didn't seem to have too much of an issue with those bulls either. They would be curious sometimes, but they, you could generally, they were sort of young enough that you could kind of yell at them and run at them and scare them away. And then I had older bulls that were on rut, and I also came across camels that weren't on rut, and you could tell this by the size of their stomach mainly was a big giveaway. So when the bulls go on rut, their guts really just tuck up. When they're not on rut, they have this big belly. And I had some even that weren't on rut, but they were just very, very curious. And it was amazing. Like I'd go running at them and yelling at them and screaming at them, and they'd just sort of turn and look at me like, "What are you doing?" And and I would sort of had the gun ready and sort of waited and so on, and eventually they'd lose interest and wander off. But I guess they just see my camels and they think, "Oh, there's some camels in fancy dress right there." They've never seen saddles, and I must smell different to them, and so I might, and probably as well. A lot of people have asked me, "Oh, did you really stuff it up for yourself by taking a female? Is that why you've got an issue with having wild bulls come in?" But I think it doesn't matter if you take males or females on a trek. I think the males, can be territorial, so they'll come into fight with other males. And also there might be the fact that because my male camels are castrated, they probably don't smell like a regular male camel, so they're still going to cause interest anyway. So yeah, it was very interesting to watch the wild behaviors. And actually one of the strangest, funniest encounters I had was I saw two camels off in the distance, two wild camels, and I noticed my camels hadn't seen these camels, and I thought, and I was getting a bit more confident by this point, and I thought, I'll just see how this plays out, and we'll just see if they cause any trouble. And the two groups, my camels and these wild camels, kept coming towards one another, and I could sort of see that I couldn't find a bull there. It was just a couple of females, and I thought, okay, that's a bit strange. And then all of a sudden, my camel Mac, who's probably the most dominant and oldest male of my bunch, he all of a sudden saw these very good-looking girls out there in the wild, and all of a sudden he transformed into a bull camel again, and he had his doula out, and he was basically, at as fast as he could in his little shackles, running over to these females and stuff, that just all of a sudden, and then all of my camels had basically looked around at one another and got, "Oh, all right, we're all going over here." So they're all joining in, and I've got all 5 of them basically like charging in their little hobbles over to these wild camels to go say hello. And of course they spooked them. The wild camels just saw these strange, bizarre creatures with ropes and halters and went flying. But yeah, all of a sudden Mac thought he might get lucky out there in the desert.
What's happening in this picture here? I think this must have been early on, some training going on.
Yeah, this is early on. This is Charlie here. I probably had put a saddle on him for the first time, I think, in this shot. So I had taught them to hush, to sit down, and I had taught them to have leg straps on, and this was probably one of the first times putting a saddle on their back. And and really there's not much you do at this point. I'm probably just telling him to sit back down again. But he jumps around, and then they realize they can't get it off their back, and then they get used to it very, very quickly. Oh, this is my dad, actually. My dad, he came out I think this was at the point when my dad sort of realized that I was actually going to do the trip, that I wasn't joking, and that, it was going ahead. I'd bought the camels, and so he was kind of like, "Oh, well, I guess I better get out there and see what's going on." So I'd taken the camels on a walk with Dad to show him, and I think Delilah is second in position there, and I tied some tires to her saddle, which is something that Chris Hill taught me to do. And the whole idea was the fact that the tires can flap around on their saddle, and the camels can roll on the tires or whatever, and it doesn't hurt the camel, and it doesn't ruin any equipment, and it just gives them a sense of having some weight on their back, and also having something flap around on their back.
I think that's all the pictures that I have.
All right.
We're done. We're
Yeah,
at
that's
the end.
it. Yeah,
Well,
that's it.
Sophie, seeing your dad in that image really, I think it speaks to the support that you had, right? I mean,
Mhm.
your folks,
Oh, big time.
yeah, this
Through
is
the,
this is
I mean,
important.
yeah, and both, like, like I said, the camel world, I've had some amazing mentors, both in Chris and Karen. But also as well, like, many other people in the camel world have got behind me. Andrew Harper, I've never met Russell Osborne, but he sends me lovely messages. Everyone's been incredibly supportive of my trip. And then, yeah, and then my family too. They've, Dad was going to be there on the coast of Western Australia when I started. Unfortunately, he couldn't because of COVID and border restrictions, but he was there to see me come in from the desert at the end of last year. Yeah, and mum as well has now been out and come to see the camels too. So everyone and friends as well. That's been a lovely thing, and a big change this year is I've been nearer my home state, and I've had friends that have been able to come out and experience it and walk for a day. And yeah, and my partner Jimmy as well has been a huge support now.
That's great. Well, listen, I think we ought to open it up to questions that anybody's got. I think the basic rundown is you've got less than a week of actual travel to your finish line, but you're stretching that out, right?
Yeah, and it's been it's a sort of funny thing. I've got only 50 Ks to go, which is crazy, and that's probably about 5 days of walking that I've worked out. It has to be quite structured now, really, because it's not just a case of being able to travel with the camels and just pull up whenever we feel like it at any place in the bush to camp. Now, obviously, we're on roads and properties and fences and everything, so Jimmy has been going ahead and he's been sorting out the logistics of where we'll be staying and who will be hosting us for the night. So yeah, so we've really worked out that we've got 5 more days left. But we're having to stall because of tide times. I really wanted to get down onto the beach at Byron early in the morning because it's most beautiful at that point in time and less busy. And so in order to run with that early tide, we're having to stall the trip a little bit, and I have to be on the beach at low tide. I have to get a permit to be on the beach, and that's what my permit stipulates. So we're stalling the trip and won't be done for about 3 weeks. And so anyway, it gives the camels time to chill out and me time to chill out. And yeah, it's a very, very cruisy walk to the finish line now.
Wonderful. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Want to chime in? Anything for Sophie?
Hi, Sophie. This is Chris. I had a lot of questions, but I'm going to try and narrow it down to a few that I'm is really nagging at my mind. How did you choose the order of your camels?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I big time. It's to do with their personalities mainly. So, like I said, I had Jude as my lead camel last year, and that started, I guess, because he was one of the first camels I developed a relationship with. He was one of the first camels to take food out of my hand, and he was inquisitive, and I thought that he would make a good lead in that way. And look, he did a fantastic job last year. But then this year, I just realized he just wasn't up to it. The maturity level with Jude, he was great some days, and then he'd be off other days, and he would get really worked up, and so I switched it to my other camel, Delilah, and because she's a bit more mature, she's a bit more settled. And yeah, and then all the other personalities come into play. So Mac is my most dominant camel, and he sits at the back of the string because, like I said, it's sort of a bit similar to the wild. He's like the bull camel in the herd, and he just wants to follow along at the back. He doesn't want to make any decisions himself. The young boys go in the middle because they're the least experienced and probably the most nervous, so they say stable in the string, best in the middle. So yeah, all to do with personalities.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And then I guess a few trivia questions. What's your favorite snack on the road?
Oh, favorite snack on the road. I went to a fantastic South African store when I was over the summer, and I picked up some amazing beef jerky. It was like, yeah, proper biltong jerky. It was like having a steak on the road. It was amazing.
Gotcha. I think my last question, but before I ask it, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. It was lovely to hear about and see all those awesome pictures.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. How many miles per day would you say that you traveled?
Ooh, I'm not good at doing the conversions. I hope you can help me here, Doug. I probably, it's anywhere from 15 kilometers to about 25 kilometers per day, and that's really worked out mainly, it used to be worked out on where the good feed is for the camels, so I wouldn't stop just anywhere. It would have to be a spot that had good feed for the camels. So
gotcha.
20 kilometers, what is that in miles? Do you know, Doug?
It's about 12 miles.
Wow.
There you go.
Incredible.
Yeah, so I had to work up to that as well, so I wasn't doing as much as that in the early days because the camels would just get too tired. So but then this year they've been much more capable of doing that, and even more is okay for us.
Yeah, gotcha.
All right, anybody else have a question for Sophie? So Sophie, as the camels have moved across the country, I know right now you're in a wet area and a wet season, so you've got some kind of abnormal health concerns, but how would you characterize your camel's condition overall from the beginning until now?
Yeah, well, like I said, I probably, one of the things I guess shocked me the most was I guess because they came out of the wild, so there's always a weight loss that happens obviously when you take an animal out of the wild. It's stress, it's new conditions. They go from eating it's the food that they're used to eating hay, so they lost a bit of condition in that process. And then you add the training process on top of that, so that sort of puts them back on the condition too. And then they just sort of probably started to build it back up again on the year that I was training them. And then we launched into then we put them on the truck and headed west to begin the journey. So they had put on a bit of condition, but it just really wasn't enough. And I really, I think that was my lack of experience showing there. And I just didn't realize that they didn't have enough condition on. And then, like I said, it was a combination of being a very bad season in Western Australia, them being new to it, and so a little bit of stress. And they just really started to lose condition, through the 6 months that I walked last year. Then they put on a heap over the summer. It was amazing to see how much they put on. And then this year they've really held it. They maybe dropped a tiny bit probably at the beginning, and then they've held it really good. And now they're probably back into dropping it again, I would say. And that's really due to the feed again too. So they're into eating, now they have to eat grass, which for them is really unfamiliar. I mean, probably for a lot of your camels over in the US, they're used to eating grass because that's mostly where people are keeping them. But my camels, they'd rarely ever eaten grass. So it's the first time doing that, and I think for them it's almost kind of like eating like popcorn or something. It sort of doesn't have enough substance in it to keep them going. So I'm substituting the hay that's behind me. They're getting a little bit of hay, eating some grasses as well, and just trying to keep their diet as varied as possible. But I think they're really not going to put on condition until I move them back to the desert again.
Well, that begs the question. You've got 50 kilometers left. You hit the beach on the East Coast. Then what? What happens?
What's that?
What happens with you and your camels?
Well, we are going to head back to the Flinders Ranges. So where the camels were last summer, and there's a property that they're going back to there. They have a beautiful 9,000 acres to roam around on, and it's a sheep property that they have a block of land that is a ridiculously huge block of land, about 9,000 acres that they're not using. So it's a pretty lovely place to be able to take them. And the Flinders Ranges is actually one of the first breeding grounds for camels in Australia. So when the first importation of camels came over to Australia, they were bred up in the Flinders Ranges. And so it's great camel country. They do incredibly well there. Some of the fattest camels I've ever seen around Australia seem to live in the Flinders Ranges. So, but the biggest problem right now is that my camel truck is sitting all the way over on the coast of WA. So I'm frantically searching to buy a truck on the eastern coast of Australia. And it's proving very tricky because, as you guys probably know, it's trucking 5 camels. It's got to be a certain length. It's got to be a certain height. It's not that easy to find. So yeah, fingers crossed, I've got about 3 weeks to find this magical camel truck that doesn't exist yet.
So you take those camels back to the Flinders Ranges, and what are the camels doing? Do they simply live a life of eating guangdong? What are they doing? Do they have a job? What's the plan?
Well, no, I'm definitely going to keep them because I'm planning on doing other expeditions, I hope. I'm really keen to get back out there in the deserts and explore more of the deserts. I've tossed up with the idea of, maybe starting a trekking organization of my own, not in the Flinders Ranges, but really, they're going to take a good summer holiday. So they're not going to be doing anything over the summer and probably most of next year, really. I've had a thought to maybe race one of them, so we might enter into some camel races and see how we go, just for the fun of it. They'll always stay in my care, and they'll definitely be used on other trips, and I probably might even do some short little trips next year, just as not for the general public, just for me and myself and friends, or anyone else who wants to come along.
And the trip for you, where does this trip take you? The trip is ending. What are you going to do with this trip? Will we hear more about it? Will we see it? Will we read about it?
I think the trip definitely won't end when I reach the beach. I think it's going to carry on. Well, I hope that it carries on too. And I've got a lot of photos and stuff to edit, and more photos that I would like to share. And I've taken some footage, and other people have taken some amazing video footage along the way. So I never set off on the trip thinking that I would shoot a documentary. So there's definitely parts of the story that are missing in that sense, but I think I have enough footage that I probably could cut something. So maybe just a short documentary that might go into some film festivals or might accompany some talks that I might do. And really now the plan is to try and put a bit of pen to paper and potentially write a book. I don't know that I'm any Robin Davidson in terms of a writer, but I've got a few stories from the trip now, so I'm going to try and share them.
Wonderful. Last chance for anybody to hop on and ask any questions. Otherwise, we'll let Sophie get on with her Thursday. Anybody else? All right. Sophie, thank you for your time. I know that as this adventure starts to wind down, there are probably lots of demands on your time. People are wanting to speak with you and wanting to hear from you. And you've got logistics to deal with. So for you to carve out, a couple of hours of your day really means a lot to us here. We thank you.
I always have time for you, Doug.
Well, we appreciate it. The trip has been inspiring for all of us who have followed. We are particularly proud of you because so many of us here and in our clinic community have been able to follow the arc of your own experience, and your humility through it has been very inspiring. I think it gives others some hope that they can take their camels and follow whatever dream they have and whatever form that may take with their camels. So collectively, for all of us here tonight and those who will be viewing in the next few days as we share this through various social media platforms, Sophie, we thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Doug, and thank you to everyone that tuned in and other people that are going to watch, and thanks to everyone in the US all the way over there that has followed my trip. That's so special to hear. I wonder if I can do a last, if you have time, I'll just pick up my tripod and I can maybe show you my camels down in their wet paddock right now for just the end, if you guys have time.
I think it'd be a great way to wrap things up. We'll see your camels.
All right.
And we'll see you down on the trail.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Talk to you soon. Did you see them?
They're way down there.
Way down the back there in their paddock, but they've got a beautiful view overlooking the rolling hills near Byron Bay.
Well, safe travels, and we'll see you at the finish line.
Thanks, Doug. See you soon.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we appreciate your time tonight. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and safe travels to you, Sophie.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.